All right, so I'm going to walk through some slides, right? So there's some images that are in a slideshow, on Google Drive, in shared resources, somewhere in there, I don't know. Looking at examples of some graphic composition stuff, just so you can start to get a sense of how we would actually use these terms that we were learning from those other videos in talking about pictures. So I'm just going to hit a couple of them because every time I try to look at more of them, this video ends up being really long and no one wants to do that. So I'm going to hit a couple of them, go through, look at the images. A, they're good images. And B, start to think about, all right, how is my eye being brought through this? Where are the edges of the frame? How do objects run into those edges? How do there's sort of like the lines or axes or curves? How do they lay out within the frame of the photograph? How do they lead my eye around the photograph? What do I think about light, shadow? How are they functioning? What is the meaning in the picture that I'm bringing to it? From my sort of cultural background, what might the photographer have put into it from theirs? How could that change the way that I see it if I were someone else? All that good stuff. Let's see, let's go ahead and pop over. All right, so I'm just going to run through a few. Fanho, so this is amazing, great, sort of very strong, stark geometry in this picture, drawing your eye down to this figure at the bottom, right? We have these nice tones with this very light, a little darker, darker still, and then the sort of blackness of the figure. If you do some research, there's some manipulation going on in this in post-production. I don't care. Here's an example thinking about, I mean, there is sort of great tonal organization, right, with this sort of big gray British cruiser, the lighter fog behind, this sort of darker traditional junk type of boat, not a judgment. And then the thing that I love is this little moment down here of the very, very dark tone of this person as sort of the smallest scale boat in the image. So this is an example of thinking about not just sort of composition and tone and hierarchy, but also sort of how the position of the viewer, right, as a, either person who lives in Hong Kong, right, or a person who is a British colonizer, or in his case, someone coming to Hong Kong from outside of it entirely, how each of those people would interpret this setting, right? This sort of like big British naval boat facing off or seeming to face off against this smaller traditional Asian boat, and then the itty bitty teeny tiny actual person there. What does that say about geopolitical power? What does that say about history? What does that say about the colonization of Hong Kong? Each of those different groups might see this photograph differently. People at the time, right, would definitely see this photograph differently from now, right, where we had just finished having this big old flapping war, right? So how this picture is interpreted, who you are, when you are, what you know about even the history of Hong Kong, right? If you don't know anything about Hong Kong, you don't know this is Hong Kong, if you don't know when this is taken and what was going on, then the picture will read very differently and you'll be missing out on a bunch of stuff. All right, I'm going to skip through, again, amazing stuff, right? Great graphic composition, Harry Callahan, Fan Ho again, looking at the way that the squares, geometry plays in both of those totally different photographs. Mikiko Haro, who we'd seen before. Ernest Withers, this is great. We've looked at a lot of images in this slideshow, if you go back through them, that are really about simplicity, about paring things down to get a shape and another shape and maybe a line or another line, trying to take this very chaotic world that we see all around us and make it into something that is simpler using graphic composition. Here we have an image that is all about this like busy, loud, like motion patterns, like just, I mean, not actual motion, but like this sort of this vibration of all these stripes, and then these stripes back here, and then the upholstery on the chair, and the like, stripy thing, whatever grid going into the ceiling that I can't even point at. Um, all of those patterns are so busy, so active, that we almost lose Isaac Hayes himself, right? He and like his sort of like um, just his skin tone is kind of the only non-busy pattern in this entire shot. So everything else kind of flattens out. It becomes this like chaos in the picture, and that allows him to pop out a little bit more. It also informs the sort of like energy of the photograph. It's really great. If he was like wearing like a white shirt and like a gray background, super boring. God, it's so good. Thinking about framing, right? So the way that the people blocking, cops blocking MLK, form this frame around him, right? That draws our attention to him. You have this sort of face-off with his eyes looking over here. Really great composition, really sort of draws us to the person that's the subject, while at the same time giving us a sort of emotional intensity, both from his facial expression and also the fact that everyone is sort of jammed together, this very tight, right on top of each other space, and that he is very clearly being blocked, right, from progressing forward. Just jump through one more. Lee Friedlander, so using the car as a framing device, right, using these interesting juxtapositions. Here you have these great like lines of the interior of the car. You have this sort of building here that's like leaning off to one side. You have this reflection of a building in this adjacent car that's like shooting off to the other side. All those things coming down into this moment of intensity right here, right, and then continuing back out on both sides. And then when you really get into the reflections, right, you have another axis going down, this little person at the end of it there. You have another person crossing the street over here. All of his pictures, wherever you look, the more you look at them, the more of these little things you find. I find it incredible. It looks like a tiny guy, but he's not. He's regular size. He's just outside. I got to skip through him. Like, oh my gosh. Jessica Kudelka, Jean Mutasami Ashe. This like great moment here where this guy in the front, right, is like perfectly touching that curve. Just fantastic. Another example of framing here where we have this guy on the boat, right, and he is sort of silhouetted against this lighter backdrop. We have these branches coming in here, again, acting as a frame. All this stuff drawing us into him as the subject, Aaron Siskind, right, classic abstraction. And that's it. So I think I made that shorter this time. Go ahead, go look through those things. Think about the way the shapes, the tones, the lines, how they interact with the edges of the frame, all that good stuff, how you would talk about it, what's going on culturally, what do you know about what's in the picture, how does that change the way that you read it, how might other people read that same photograph. And we'll start to use the skills that we're developing doing this next week when we go ahead into looking at the photographs that you're going to make for assignment 1. So good luck, and we'll talk about them next week.